On April 18, 2014, Prince won the fight of his life. Not a lawsuit exactly. A negotiation, one that had taken more than 20 years, cost him his own name for a while, and made him a punchline in the press. But he won it. Warner Brothers agreed to hand him complete ownership of every master recording he had made for them. Purple Rain, 1999, Dirty Mind, all of it. His. He had spent 2 decades insisting that an artist who doesn't own his work doesn't own anything. He had written a single word on his cheek and worn it in public for 3 years to make the point. And now he had proof he was right. 2 years later, he was gone. And because of one thing he never did, one piece of paper he never signed, a 6-year court fight began over everything he had just won. Today, half of Prince's estate is owned by a company he never chose, never negotiated with, and never met. This is a money story. Let's get into it. Prince Rogers Nelson signed with Warner Brothers in 1977. He was 19 years old. The deal gave him something almost unheard of for a teenager: creative control over his own records. What it did not give him was ownership of the recordings themselves. Warner kept the masters. That was standard. That's still standard. For a decade, it didn't matter, because everything worked. Purple Rain in 1984 made him one of the biggest artists on Earth. And in 1992, he signed a contract extension reported at around $100 million, one of the richest recording deals anyone had ever been offered. And then he looked at what he'd actually agreed to, and he decided it wasn't worth it. Because the money wasn't the problem. The problem was that Warner controlled how much music he could put out. And Warner owned the master tapes of everything he had already made. Prince recorded constantly. He had a vault at Paisley Park filling up with unreleased material. The label wanted fewer albums spaced further apart to protect the market. He wanted to release what he made when he made it. So in 1993, on his 35th birthday, he stopped being Prince. He changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol, which the press couldn't even print. They started calling him the artist formerly known as Prince, and he began appearing in public with a single word written on his cheek: slave. It was widely mocked. It cost him radio play, it cost him chart position, and it made him look, to a lot of people, like a man who had lost perspective about a $100 million contract. He explained himself to Rolling Stone in 1996, and the line has outlived almost everything else he said about business. If you don't own your masters, your master owns you. He finished out the contract the hard way. He delivered Warner the albums he owed them, and the relationship stayed frozen for the better part of 2 decades. He left. He released music independently, on the internet, through his own label, bundled with concert tickets, given away with newspapers, almost every distribution method that existed, and a few nobody had tried. And the whole time, the masters stayed where they were. Then, in April of 2014, the story turned. Prince and Warner Brothers announced a new agreement. He would return to the label. Warner would release a 30th anniversary edition of Purple Rain. And the part that actually mattered, ownership of the master recordings he had made for Warner, would transfer to him. He described it afterward with almost no drama at all. He said it was just a business relationship, clean and transparent, and that he had gotten his stuff back. Think about what that means financially. The masters are the asset. They are what streaming revenue flows from, what licensing deals are cut against, what a catalog sale is priced on. Every dollar those recordings would earn for the rest of time now went to him instead of past him. He had taken the single most valuable thing in the music business, permanent ownership of the recordings, and pulled it back from a corporation that had held it for 37 years. Almost nobody does this. Artists spend entire careers trying and failing. Prince did it. And then he had 2 years to decide what happened to it next. Prince died in April of 2016. He was 57. He left no will, no trust, no instructions, no document naming a single beneficiary for a catalog he had just spent 20 years fighting to control. Under Minnesota law, when there is no will, the state decides. And what followed was a 6-year probate battle in Carver County District Court. Start with the basic problem. Nobody knew what it was worth. Comerica Bank Trust, appointed to administer the estate, appraised it at $82.3 million. The Internal Revenue Service looked at the same assets in 2020 and valued them at $163.2 million, roughly double. The gap wasn't the houses. Real estate is easy to price. The gap was the music, the catalog, and the vault of unreleased recordings, which nobody had a clean way to value. In January of 2022, they settled the difference. The IRS and Comerica agreed on a final figure of $156.4 million, and the IRS dropped a $6.4 million accuracy penalty it had assessed. In July of 2022, a judge signed off, and the 6-year fight ended. But look at what 6 years cost. Court filings and reporting describe tens of millions of dollars paid out to lawyers and consultants over the life of the estate. Money that came out of what the heirs would receive. And 2 of Prince's 6 sibling heirs died during the proceedings, before the estate was ever distributed. They never saw any of it. Here is the part that lands hardest. Because there were no instructions, the heirs were free to sell their expected shares, and some did, to a New York music company called Primary Wave. When the estate finally closed, it was divided roughly in half. One half to an entity owned by Primary Wave, the other to a company holding 3 of Prince's half-siblings and their advisors. So the man who spent 20 years and his own public reputation refusing to let a company own his music now has a company owning half of it. Not because he lost a negotiation, because he never wrote down what he wanted. It is tempting to file this under carelessness. It isn't that simple. Prince was not careless about money or about ownership. He was arguably the most deliberate artist of his generation on exactly that subject. He understood the machinery better than most executives did, which is what makes the lesson so uncomfortable. He got the hard part right and the easy part wrong. Winning ownership took 20 years, enormous leverage, and a willingness to burn his own commercial standing to get there. Writing down who inherits it would have taken an afternoon. He did the first and not the second, and the second is what decided the outcome. So the lesson is this: owning something is only half of it. Control ends the moment you stop being there to exercise it. And the only thing that carries your intentions past that point is a document. Not a plan you describe to people. Not what everyone knows you would have wanted. A signed instruction. This is not a celebrity problem. Surveys consistently find that most American adults have no will at all. The difference is only in scale. If you die without one, the same thing happens that happened here. A court applies a default formula, the process takes years, professionals bill against the estate the entire time, and the people you would have chosen may not be the people who end up with it. Prince proved, better than almost anyone in the history of the music business, that you can take your work back. He also proved that taking it back isn't the last step. He won the argument he spent his life having, and then left the room without saying what should happen next. If this one hit you, hit subscribe. Because next time we're staying in the music business, but flipping the story. We're telling you about an artist who sold $170 million worth of records and whose very first royalty check was $1,972. Not a typo. She had the hits. Somebody else had the contract. You don't want to miss it.